You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 212. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. How is it possible that we are already in the month of June, mid-June, when this episode goes live, 2025? Where has the year gone? That is what you might be asking yourself. That is certainly what I am asking myself. And today's episode is all about taking that step back and taking time to reflect, and in particular, how to get back on track if you feel like you have veered off. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about what that means. But before I do that, I would absolutely love to share a few opportunities that are coming up for you and I to work together in a more personal capacity than on this podcast. Not that I don't want you here. I'm so glad you're here. I am honored that you are taking time out of your busy schedule to tune in to connect with me this week. Thank you. But I also would love the opportunity to go deeper with the work that we're doing here. So a few opportunities coming up. The first of those opportunities are a pair of webinars. These are webinars that are taking place on June 12th, that is a Thursday, and June 26th, that is also a Thursday. Both webinars are at noon Pacific time, so you can figure out what time that is wherever it is that you live. And the purpose of these webinars is really to help set you up for success in the second half of the calendar year of 2025. The first of the webinars, the one on June 12th, is going to be all about leading yourself first. Now, I was initially going to start with the second webinar, which is all about the mid-year reset. But as I was planning the webinars, I thought, you know what? It makes a lot more sense for you to figure out what leadership looks like for you, to reestablish yourself as the leader in your practice, to define what that means, to be very strategic about what that means before you go ahead and press the reset button. We want to focus on who you are as a leader first before we turn to where you are leading yourself and potentially others to go. So the first webinar, June 12th, it's all about leading yourself first. And then on June 26th, we're going to be doing a deep dive into your reset. That's where we're going to workshop your year. We're going to evaluate where you're at currently, the wins that you've had, the areas where maybe you're not quite where you want to be. And we're going to go step by step through a process to get you a plan. Because if you know me at all, you know that I love a good plan. And so I want to help you create that. So those are two opportunities. They are free. They are coming up this month. And I would love for you to join me. I will put links to register in the show notes with this episode. If you cannot find the links to register for whatever reason, send me an email, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will send those links to you. No problem. If you can't join me live for those webinars, that's also not a problem. Register anyways, and I will send you recordings. I do encourage you, though, to come live. It is a different experience for all of us when we're in the same Zoom room. Not that the replays aren't good as well, but I would absolutely love the opportunity to energetically connect with you if you've got the time and capacity to do that. So that is the first thing I wanted to share. Upcoming webinars, join me and invite your friends. I would absolutely love to have, more people join us. The more the merrier. We will do this work together. Now, the second thing I wanted to share with you is that I run a mastermind program. It is a 6-month program for women lawyers, and I have been running this program for the past 2.5 years. We are about to wrap up the 5th group of women who have gone through this program. I love them. I love every group of women who has come through this program. And if it's something that you have heard me speak about before, or maybe this is the first time you're hearing me speak about it, and it sounds intriguing to you, then I would absolutely love for you to consider joining and potentially join me and the group of women from July to December of this year so that we can really focus on you, on your goals for the balance of the year, and set yourself up for success. And this group, every time I do it is different, and every time it is absolutely magical. The program that we go through is thematically the same in the sense that we take a topic each month and we dive into it. So if you join me in July, we'll start with setting a goal together. Then we'll move on to establishing your self-concept. So that first step is picking a goal. The second step is who do you need to become in order to achieve that goal? We talk about obstacles, which I absolutely adore. Obstacles aren't something that everybody loves. And truth be told, there are times when I wish that I didn't have the obstacles that I have. But as a coach, I find them fascinating because the obstacle is a lesson plan. It is what stands between you and the things that you truly want. And so if you can crack the code to your obstacles, you really have no limit on what you can accomplish. And so that month where we dive into obstacles is revealing, it is empowering, and I absolutely love taking groups of women through it. From obstacles, we move into confidence. So we dive deep into what that looks like for you. We talk about authority. We talk about power and how to generate more of all of those things for yourself in your practice and outside of it. Then we move on to boundaries because now that we've established what your goals are, who you need to be to achieve them, we've started to look at some of the obstacles. We've looked at you developing your confidence and what that means, what gaps you're closing through that. Then it also becomes more relevant to think about the places where you need to start protecting the things that are most important to you and protecting yourself against things that have a good risk of creeping in and pulling you off track, right? Today's theme. So we spend a month on boundaries and then finally we focus on sustainable success. So that's the arc of the curriculum that you can expect to go through. And each month we meet twice monthly as a group. We talk about these topics in depth. I teach on these topics. I coach you on these topics. And what that does for you is it allows you to have a designated time and space, a designated community, a goal that you choose for yourself, and a supportive environment where you get to come back and focus. And I have found that this program attracts a different style of practitioner, I will say, in the sense that it's not all big firm lawyers. It's not all solo practitioners. It's not all in-house counsel that come to join me in this group. It's a mix, a blend of different types of practices. And the topics that the women in these groups will focus on are also different. Sometimes the goal is to grow your practice or switch your job or get a hold on the management of your practice, learn to delegate better, have more authority, transition into a new role within your organization. There are all these different goals that women have within the program. Sometimes the goal is to create better boundaries, to create better balance. And what I find is there are different types of practices from which the women will join. There are different goals, and yet there is this beautiful common theme of wanting to be there, wanting to be in community with other women lawyers, wanting to share your experiences. So if you know for sure that you don't want to share your experiences, that's one thing. But if you've never really done it, but you are so curious to know what it would be like to peek behind closed doors, hear from other women in terms of what they're actually doing in their practice, and sometimes hearing stories that you wouldn't be sharing with the average everyday person on the street, what you might find is that it gives you so much more insight into the other women who are practicing law alongside you and insights into yourself. And that is feedback I receive year after year, which is that it is so empowering to have these conversations, to hear that you are not alone, and also to be able to compare your practice with the practice of other women. And this is not a competition by any stretch, but I think what people often find is that by hearing about what someone else's practice looks like, it can confirm that you are in the right place or that you're not in the right place. So for example, you might be in a big firm thinking, really be interested in having my own practice. And then you hear from a woman who is running her own practice and you think, you know what? I thought it was one thing, but it's actually quite different. And whereas you can see that this person really loves that their personality is suited to a solo practice or a small practice, and you can see how it aligns with their goals, etc., you yourself think, you know what, that actually isn't for me. So there's a lot of good that can come from being in a group with other women, comparing notes, supporting each other. And so if you have any questions, you're curious about this, I absolutely encourage you to reach out to me. I would love to have you in the group. Now, I mentioned there are 6 topics that we cover month to month. We also do a couple of bonus classes. One of them is time management. And the time management course I love doing. I mean, if you've listened to this podcast for any stretch of time, you know I am obsessed with productivity and time management and how to maximize our days. And so each time I do this program, I'll do a course, a training on time management, and it's never the same because the women in each group have different focuses on time management, on practice management. And so I get to tailor it to the group, which is extremely fun. And we also talk about transitions. And again, you may not be transitioning in a sense of going from job A to job B, but for every person in the group, there is a transition that is going on in her life. And so there is an opportunity to focus on skills and strategies to navigate transitions with greater confidence, to understand the different stages of a transition, why certain parts feel harder than others, how to prepare yourself for a transition, how to navigate the different stages of transition, and to do all of that alongside other women just like you, with me as your fearless leader. Now, I say fearless and I'm smiling because that is not true. I, of course, have fears. I'm human. But I am committed to creating a container, to creating a community, to creating an environment where you feel safe, where you feel supported, where you feel heard. And if that's something that you're craving, then please do reach out to me and let me know that you're interested. There will be an opportunity to register. I'll get the course page up in the next short while, so you could even go straight to the course page. That will also be linked to the notes with this episode, so you can learn more about the program there. And as I mentioned, if this resonates with you, then my guess is that it's something that would be a good fit for you. I do cap the group at 8 lawyers, so you want to make sure that you sign up in time before the spaces all fill up. And I'd love, love, love to have you. So that's what I wanted to share before we talk about getting back on track. And of course, if you find that you have fallen off track, this is a really great place for you to get back on track with the support of me, with the support of a community. I mentioned it's a group program and one-to-one coaching, so there are a couple of one-to-one sessions that come along with that program that can be really helpful. And the other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is that this program starts in July, and July, I know, is a tricky time of year. It is for me. My kids are out of school starting in July, and so I structure the July to December program in a similar format. We do 2 calls every month, etc. But I am mindful of you being on summer vacation. And so I know that you're not necessarily going to sign up in July with the goal of exerting yourself and putting hundreds of hours into a project over the course of the summer. I get it. That's not realistic for most women that I know, at least. And so what I do is I meet you where you are, and we structure the program in such a way that it's going to work for your schedule. So if that's a concern of yours, again, that is something we can absolutely discuss in more detail if you have concerns about that. So with that, let's get back on track for today's episode. And today's episode is all about getting on track. And what that implies, number one, is that there is a track. Some people would question whether that is even true. But I'm not going to go that deep today, at least not on that question. I'm going to assume that you are attracted to the title because you feel like we're halfway through the year, and in many respects, you've done exactly what you wanted to do. In some respects, you've gone way above and beyond what you ever thought you were going to do. And in some respects, maybe you haven't really touched a particular project or goal for a while. And that's an area where you want to bring yourself back into alignment. Now, another way of looking at this question of being back on track is something that goes a little bit deeper. I think sometimes getting back on track can be a pretty surface thing. You might think about your calendar or your schedule or your rhythms at work, and maybe something happens that disrupts you for a little bit of time. You maybe have a child at home who gets sick and you need to take a couple of days off work. And so you need to, after that, bring yourself back on track. I know for myself, if I commit to an evening event during the work week, then I find that our whole family falls off track for at least a couple of days, because if I go out in the evening, that means I'm not at home to do the usual routines. My husband will sometimes be here, sometimes somebody else comes in, sometimes I am now at the stage where the kids can fend for themselves for a few hours. And so what happens is I get home late and dinner is late and things happen late. And so everything gets pushed back and it takes us a day or two to get back on track. That's relatively minor. But getting off track can also be much deeper than that. And that is when you start to feel that you're pulling away from yourself. You are actually not just off track, you're out of alignment. And there's a wonderful book that Martha Beck has written. Martha Beck is a world famous life coach, and she wrote a book called The Way of Integrity. And in that book, she talks about integrity in a couple of different ways. Integrity being this idea of integrity in the way that we often think about it, being honest and true and doing the hard thing when nobody's really looking. There's that definition of integrity. But there's also the idea of integrity as in wholeness. And the way that she describes it is to think about an airplane. And an airplane, when all the pieces are in integrity, that means that the airplane itself will be able to fly. It will be able to withstand turbulence because everything is aligned. It's in integrity with itself. And if you take that same plane and you loosen some of the joints and it falls out of alignment, it might be okay when it's going through certain, low speeds. And I'm totally guessing here because I'm not an aerospace engineer, but at a certain point, that airplane is probably going to be okay. But when it starts to hit turbulence, that's when things risk falling apart. And so that's another form of alignment or integrity and alignment that I'd invite you to think about in today's podcast episode. Are you in alignment? And if you have fallen off track, then what might be happening is it's not just a one-off here and there. It may be a series of one-offs that have led to greater lack of alignment. It could also be that you have disconnected from yourself in such a way that you no longer have that sense of integrity. You feel out of alignment. So I'd invite you to think about that as well as we go through today's podcast episode. So today, getting back on track, what I'd like you to think about first is, are you in a situation right now where you feel like you have gotten off track, or maybe even deeper than that, where you have fallen out of alignment? Now, there are some telltale signs that you can look for to suggest that maybe that is what has happened. Now, let's start by the way that you feel. Now, I know from my experience working with lawyers and my own lived experience that when there is a lack of alignment, some of the feelings that might come up for you are boredom. You might find that the tasks that you engage in day to day are starting to feel boring. Now, it may be justified. These may be repetitive tasks that you often do, but you might find that your usual boredom, maybe it's a 1 out of 10. Now that boredom has escalated to a 7 out of 10. Maybe what used to be mildly unpleasant now fills you with a sense of dread to the point that you're barely able to do it. You might also feel frustration. And this can show up at work. It can show up outside of work. And sometimes frustration outside of work will bleed into work and vice versa. So frustration can show up in relationships with colleagues. Maybe it's somebody who reports to you and you get increasingly frustrated that they're not doing the job the way that you want them to do the job. And why can't they do it? It's so straightforward and you've explained it 1,000 times, right? Or maybe it's someone in your personal life where you keep coming back to the same, loggerheads, where you have the same problem over and it becomes increasingly frustrated. And why can't they just change? Why can't it be easy? Why does this always have to come back? You might have a sense of restlessness where you look at your days, your weeks, your months, and they all seem to blend into one. And you find yourself thinking, like, how long is this going to go on for? This is really not changing. And you might feel restless and like you want something different to happen. You might feel resentful. I mean, this is really tricky, especially if you are a caretaker type person and you are picking up the slack in a number of different domains, right? Maybe your partner's been working extra, and so you've been picking up the slack at home. Maybe your kids have extra activities, and so you've been doing extra driving, extra entertaining, extra caretaking. Maybe there have been members of your family who have fallen ill, and you're the person who is looking after them. Maybe you are taking on more projects at work, and some of those projects are really great, and some of them are projects that nobody else would touch. And so what you might notice is that you start to have that story in your head where you're feeling like, why am I the one doing this? This is not what I want to be doing. And it leads to that yucky feeling of resentment. And then finally, you might also feel physically tired. Now, this doesn't always happen, but if you find that you've overcommitted yourself and you're starting to teeter on that brink of burnout where you're just not feeling 100%, maybe you're not eating the way that you want to, you're not exercising as much as you want to, you're not getting enough sleep, enough rest, you're constantly on the go, your mind never stops racing, you might start to feel exhausted. So you might have those feeling signs that things are off track. You feel bored, you feel restless, you're frustrated, you're resentful. This just doesn't feel like the way that you want to be living your life. Now, another way of finding some of the telltale signs that you are off track or out of alignment, or I should say, and or out of alignment, is the language that you're using. You might be telling yourself and maybe others that something just doesn't feel right. Something feels off. Or you might be thinking about your next 6 months. I've just brought up this whole idea of the mid-year and working toward December. And maybe that was an exciting prospect for you. Or maybe it just brought up this giant question mark in the back of your head, which is, I don't really know what I want for December. I don't know what I want this year to look like. So that can be mildly disconcerting. Somebody might ask you, what's important to you? What do you want to accomplish this year? What's your 5-year plan? And you might draw a complete blank and think, I have no idea. I'm so busy dealing with the day-to-day. I haven't had a chance to even reflect on what I'm having for dinner, let alone what I am going to be doing with the rest of my life. And then finally, which is a variation of that, is just a hard time describing your plans to others. So what are you doing? What do you like about your job? Where do you see your career going? These questions become really hard to answer because you yourself don't really know. You are, to use the language of the podcast, you've fallen off track. And finally, in addition to how you're feeling, the language, the words that you're using, you might notice the things that you're doing that signal that you have gone off track. So you might be going through the day-to-day motions, and at every juncture, you are questioning what you're doing. Why am I responding to this email? Why am I packing these lunches? Why am I going to the grocery store? Why am I calling this person? If you're questioning as you're doing, chances are that's a sign that this is not something that you feel particularly happy about, and a sign that maybe you're off track from where you really want to go. You might find that you are withdrawing from relationships that you have with people that you're usually in relationship with. You might find that you're withdrawing from activities that you normally would really enjoy. And this could be a sign that you just are in a low mood. And if it's a sign of something more, then that's something that you want to also take into account. This podcast episode is not about the more serious forms of withdrawal, right? If you find that you're feeling depressed, really low mood, that is a time to take very seriously and to reach out for support with your friends, with your family, and potentially with a counselor to steer yourself back on track in the right direction. But shy of that, you might also find that you're withdrawing, and it could be a sign of lack of interest, lack of engagement, that the things that you were doing before, the people that you were interested in visiting with before, there's something that is different now, and that may be a sign that you're changing, that your needs are changing. You might also find that while you're pulling away from things that are familiar, you're becoming increasingly intrigued by things that are new. So new people, new experiences. You might find that all of a sudden you are starting to look at what else is out there. What alternatives are there for you? And that could be relationships, new friendships, new activities. It could be new hobbies. It could be new places to explore. It could also be professional, right? You might be thinking about this role that you're in isn't really working for you anymore. What else is out there? So you might find yourself scrolling through the job ads wherever you find those, whether it's on LinkedIn or an email that you receive. you might start looking and thinking, maybe this is not the place for me where I am right now. What else is out there? You might start thinking about calling a recruiter. You might start thinking about calling a coach. And so if these are activities that you're engaged in, chances are you are off track, you're out of alignment. And what you want is to turn this ship around, right? You want to find a new North Star so that you can steer your ship in that direction. So I've narrowed it down to 3 common causes for how it is that you get off track in the first place. I'm going to share those with you, and then I'm going to offer solutions. And because of the way that I've framed the problems, the causes, you're already going to be able to guess at what some of the solutions are. So put your thinking cap on as you're listening, because that might help you to brainstorm how these apply to you in your practice, in your life, and what you might choose to do going forward. So the first reason why you might find yourself getting off track, falling off track, is really time. It's getting distracted. It's having insufficient time to do the things that are actually on track for you. And as a woman, if you are a mother, for example, you might find that you're doing a very large amount of caretaking. And I hope I'm not being sexist or generalizing too much by saying this, but this is the experience that I have had, that many women that I know have had. And so I want to recognize it and acknowledge you out there if that's the boat that you find yourself in. You might be so busy looking after other people, whether it's your children, whether it's your aging parents, whether it's your partner, whether it's people at work. Often you might find, if you're a woman in a professional environment, that you're also doing more than others when it comes to mentoring, when it comes to nurturing relationships, when it comes to problem solving. I was listening, a little bit off topic, I was listening to a podcast episode the other day that was talking about discontent in the workplace generally. This was not a law-specific discussion. It was just somebody talking about, I think it was transitions to out of office that happened in the late 90s. And what they sort of offered up, it was a man speaking, and what he offered up was that in this phase of the late 90s, and I don't know how much of this is true, but he was making the assertion that as people distanced themselves from a physical office space, somebody had to be there to check in on employees and see how they were doing. And he said women were better at this job than men because they could pick up on the social cues and help these people understand themselves, help these people get the support they needed. And I don't know how much of this is true or his perception of it, but it goes to show it's an example of how women often, perhaps because we have these highly refined social skills. I know men who also have highly refined social skills, so I don't know that this is really a us versus them type of thing, but the people who tend to have the better social skills may find themselves with additional responsibilities at work that aren't necessarily compensated. If you're in a billable hour model and you're doing a lot of mentoring, you may be working a lot and not necessarily being recognized or compensated for that work. So where I'm going with this is one of the causes for getting off track is that sometimes you're distracted. You're pulled away toward looking after your kids, you're looking after clients, you're looking after colleagues, you're looking after family members, you're looking after a whole bunch of other people, and their needs are taking priority over your needs. And you might be saying yes to all of this because you don't want to hurt people's feelings. You genuinely do want to help out. You might love doing this work. It might feel really satisfying when you can meet somebody where they are and help them resolve a problem. I mean, that might feel really good. But the problem there is that by overextending yourself, you may stop paying attention to yourself. And if you aren't paying attention to you, then it may be that nobody else is doing that either. So that can be a reason why you find yourself getting disconnected and off track. Now, another common cause, another reason why you might find yourself getting off track is that you are pursuing a should dream, a should goal, something that you feel like you should do. And should, you may have heard it described this way before, should equals could plus shame, right? It's like you should be doing it, but you don't really want to do it. And there are all sorts of sources of the should, right? It could be other people. If you're in a professional environment, for example, and you are the best mentor and people say, well, you're the best at it, therefore you should be doing it. It's part of your job to make sure that our associates are well taken care of. I mean, you might resonate with that. You might take that on. even though it might conflict with another goal that you have that is really important to you. You might also find that you are trapped in a way pursuing goals that society at large tells you should do. And here's where the word good can sometimes come into play. What it takes to be a good lawyer, right? A good lawyer answers emails at midnight. A good lawyer shows up first thing in the morning and is the last person to leave. A good lawyer helps everybody because everybody deserves representation. There's that idea of being a good lawyer. There's the idea of being a good daughter who obeys, a good daughter who is there for her parents, a good daughter who never argues, a good daughter who always dresses up for family affairs. I don't know, you define it, but there's that role that you might find yourself trying to fit yourself into. Good mother. As you know, if you're a mother, the list for what a good mother could potentially include goes on and on. A good friend. A good friend is always there for a friend in need. A good friend will show up at the last minute. And so what you might find is that you're getting good at all these different roles that you play in your life, except for the role of being yourself. And that can create that disconnection. Another thing that might pull you in that direction of a should dream is a goal that maybe you thought you really wanted, or at one point you truly thought you wanted it, but it doesn't really appeal to you anymore. That you, once upon a time, maybe you wanted to be head of your group at work, and it was really important to you. And then things changed. You realize that actually you don't really want to be in a managerial role. Where you really want to be is more in an execution role, or a role where you're more hands on deck. And so your goal might change there. You might have set a goal at the beginning of this calendar year, one to maybe have a higher number of recorded billable hours by this time in the year. Maybe you had goals for marketing. Maybe you had goals for professional development. And as you stepped closer to those goals, you realized, no, wait a minute, I set this goal not really thinking through whether or not it was something that I actually wanted. And now that I'm in it, I don't think it feels right. And then finally, the third common cause for getting off track is this idea of emotional resistance. And this is where I spend a lot of time with clients because it involves dealing with the discomfort of emotions. And if you are in that surface level getting off track, you've kind of veered off the pathway and, it's the discomfort of sort of pulling yourself off that current track you might be on where you're going with the flow. You're kind of lost in the inertia versus having to reestablish routines. There's something that can be quite painful about reestablishing routines, setting things up all over again. So that might be a mild discomfort that you're just not really interested in pursuing, right? It feels hard versus a much deeper level emotional resistance. If you are thinking about making a significant shift, a significant career shift, or a big shift in your personal life, that might bring up a lot of uncertainty. It might bring up a lot of anxiety. If you're thinking of leaving your role, for example, it might bring up feelings of guilt that you would be leaving people behind. You'd be abandoning your clients. It might be that you have a fear of failure, that you might pursue something and it goes awry, or you might even have a fear of success. What if you go after this thing and you succeed and people who used to really like you, people who used to be your friend, start to judge you and they no longer want to be with you? And of course, you might have that fear or anxiety of the unknown. Before you step out onto that new path, it hasn't proven itself yet. You don't know if you're going to be successful at it. And so there's that anxiety of the unknown. And so just to recap, 3 common causes for finding yourself off track. Number 1 is just time, distractions, catering to what other people want you to do as opposed to what you yourself want to do. Number 2, pursuing should dreams. So dreams that you think you should have, that other people think you should have, dreams that maybe appealed years ago that no longer appeal. And then finally, that idea of emotional resistance, right? That idea that you have fear around pursuing something different, that you are staying the course because it's uncomfortable, but it's a lot less comfortable than leaving where you are currently and venturing off into the unknown. So, as I mentioned, the solution really does present itself when you define the problem the way that I just have. So, what does that mean? If you have not had time to really figure out what you actually want and to spend time on that, then obviously the solution is to carve out that time for yourself. And it's really easy to say it. It's a lot harder in practice to do it. in the group coaching program that I mentioned earlier, that is one of the biggest challenges that the women that I work with face, right? They've got goals and they've got commitments and they want to do all of the things. And so it is very challenging to decide which of the things you're currently doing you're going to stop doing in order to make space for you, to make space for your goals. So to create time, coaching can be really effective for this. I recognize that, yes, I am a coach. And yes, that is very self-serving to say, get a coach, but I do it. I encourage others to do it by designating time to yourself, to your goals, to figuring out what you actually want is a really great way to make it a priority, especially if you pay for that service. Now you've made an investment and you don't want to waste your investment. So it forces you to force yourself to prioritize you and your goals. Now, there are other ways you can create that time. I like to set aside time every day to journal. That's really helpful. I set aside time each month to reflect on my months, and I reflect every year and usually at the half year point as well. So that's a practice for me. I'm a coach. I'm in this space. So it makes sense that I would have this top of mind and that I would be doing these things. You're a lawyer. You're probably not a coach. And so it may not be part of your routine. You might need a bit of extra support to carve out that time. Now, it might also mean that you need to clear things off your plate, right? I just mentioned that one of the biggest challenges that lawyers that I work with have is saying no to something that they're already doing in order to free up space to go after your goals. So that means saying no. It means delegating. Again, easier said than done. And I thought I'd mention here some of the things that I've done recently to create that space. I like to attend trainings. So the other week I went to this weekend retreat with Elizabeth Gilbert. She came to Vancouver. This is where I live. And she had a 2-day workshop and we went very deep. We went very deep. I was surprised actually at how profoundly the workshop affected me. It was actually very interesting. I mean, she had us write out our greatest fears and then read them out to the person sitting next to us. I mean, that is pretty intense. And I don't do that in my group program. Maybe I should. But again, setting aside time to actually go and dedicate to thinking about your life, thinking about your goals is a really great way to make that time, make that space, and to reacquaint yourself with things about you that you may have forgotten, not because it's not important, but because it's not part of your day-to-day. I mentioned journaling. I really love that. Listening to podcasts, hanging out with friends who listen. So my guess is that you've got a whole variety of friends that you are acquainted with. And some of them are fun friends. You go out and it's all lighthearted and it's laughter and you tell goofy stories and it's rarely ever serious. And then maybe you've got friends where the conversation runs deeper and they really listen and they ask you powerful questions. For this type of exercise, I think putting yourself in the company of the latter, the friends who are really going to be there for you and ask you those questions, that's a really great way for you to reacquaint yourself with where you're at and where you want to go. So that's the first thing, reconnect with yourself. That second problem, this pursuing should dreams, other people's dreams or your dreams that no longer are really your dreams, is to reevaluate your why. So here I would encourage you to go deep. I talked about that session with Liz Gilbert. That's what you want to do with yourself. You want to figure out where you stand. Now, last week's podcast episode, if you listened to it, was an interview with 3 amazing women lawyers where they talked about their non-linear career paths. And so non-linear by definition means that they talked about transitions that they made. And one of the themes that came up was, when do you know it's time to make a transition? And often that started with a feeling in the gut that something wasn't right and needed to change. So here, I would encourage you to tap into your gut. And however it is that you do that, I invite you to listen to yourself. What feels good? What doesn't feel good? Ask yourself deep questions, right? What do you really want? Professionally, personally, from your relationships? Are you living in the city that you want to live in? Do you like your home environment? How is your situation with your family? Maybe it's your family in the sense of your partner and your kids. Maybe it's your parents, your siblings. So ask yourself how you're doing and give yourself time to really clarify what it is that you want going forward. And when you think about the goals that you have, ask yourself, are these current goals or are these goals that I set 5 years ago that are no longer applicable? Are these someone else's goals? These might be goals that your parents had for you and that you adopted and internalized and didn't ever really question. And now that you're in the thick of it, you're thinking to yourself, like, is this really me? Is this really what I want? And then finally, look at where your goals are taking you, right? If you sit down right now and write out all the things that you're doing, the areas that you focus on, where you're spending your time, and what that's accomplishing in the near term, and also where it's going to take you in the future, is it where you want to go? And chances are things are going to change anyways. If you think about kids, my kids are 10 and 12. Next year, my son will start high school. So I know that without me doing anything, things are going to change on that score. My role in his life will change just because he's in a different situation. And the same is true for you. There are things that are going to change no matter what. So even if you were to do or to intend to do the same thing that you're doing today, repeatedly for the rest of your life, circumstances will change such that you're not going to end up on a one-way path where nothing changes. But assuming that were the case, would the things you're doing now, would the goals that you have today take you to the place that you want to get to? And then finally, so we've talked about reconnecting with yourself by carving out some time. We've talked about reevaluating your why. Are the goals that you're pursuing your goals? And then finally, rebuild your relationship with yourself. If you are struggling emotionally, I strongly encourage you to look at how you are relating to yourself. What kind of language are you using with yourself? I am always mystified when I speak with people and they have such negative self-talk. And I have been there. I used to be my own worst critic. And I said things to myself that in hindsight, I just think, why would I ever do that? And I know why I did that. I was conditioned to do that. I felt like it was safer to do that. I felt like being really hard on myself was a great way to get motivated. It was what I learned. It's what I saw other people doing. It seemed socially acceptable, all of the things. And yet when I hear other people say unkind things to themselves, I can't help but interrupt. I can't help but point it out. I can't help but ask them to try to think of something nicer. And for you, if you are using harsh criticism to motivate yourself, to push yourself forward, that can set you back more than it can help you forward. Yes, maybe it got you to where you are today, but does it make you happy? Does it make you want to move to the next step? Does it help you get back on track? And so let's really practice and focus on using kind language. And if you need help with that, I've got tons of podcast episodes about self-talk. I will help you with your self-talk. Please be kind to yourself. I also encourage you to think about your emotional health. How are you doing? Are you paying attention to your emotional life? I mean, again, this is an area where I used to just take all of my emotions and I don't know where I put them, but there was some notional box that I had for them. And if it was fear or concern or worry or whatever, it just got all packaged up and put away to be dealt with later. And since becoming a coach, since becoming a person who is much more interested in the power of emotions, I used to think of them as a hindrance. I used to think that they were an obstacle to legal analysis. Now I have a much different view. I see how emotions can be a great source of information. I see how they can be a great source of fuel and energy, how they can be indicators of what's working and what's not, how to deal with emotions, how to be with your emotions. So if you can increase your capacity to feel your emotions, recognize your emotions, manage your emotions, to understand why you feel angry, to understand why you feel sad, you open up. Well, first of all, you unblock. If you're kind of holding all that in, that takes a lot of energy. So if you just let them out, then that frees up energy to do other things. It also gives you a much better understanding of yourself and of others. So we're going to want to address emotional health. And then finally, we want you to learn or relearn to trust yourself. And this is really tricky. Again, you may have been socially conditioned to think that your opinion is invalid. Your parents are right and you are wrong. That's the generation that I was raised in. The authorities knew everything. They had the answers. And if your answer was different, it was probably wrong. And I've had to relearn, and I'm still relearning how to trust myself. That is probably the biggest thing that I'm focusing on at the moment. It's aligned with a goal I had for this year, which is to have a breakthrough year. What I'm learning is that part of my own personal breakthrough is learning how to trust myself. And that comes from years of being in environments where there's lots of shoulds. There's lots of should goals that other people will choose for you. And if you go against that, you need to be really tight with yourself. So learning how to trust yourself is key in terms of getting yourself back on track, because you want to make sure that when you do get back on track, you're getting back on the right track for you. So from that place, then, if we just recap what we've covered, you will be taking time for yourself, taking time to actually focus in on you, your health, what you want in your life. And this doesn't mean that you're ignoring everybody else. It doesn't mean that, you're never going to make lunch for your kids again, or that you're never going to talk to your parents again, or that you're never going to help out a client in need or mentor another lawyer. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we're going to find some sort of a happy middle ground, right? And it's probably not in the middle, and it's probably a moving target, but we're going to find a way to carve out time for you. We're going to gain more clarity about what you want currently and what you think you're going to want going forward. We don't want to look to the past and say, well, this is what you wanted 5 years ago, so we're locked into that and we're never going to change our mind. We get to recalibrate. You get to recalibrate. And then finally, we want to rebuild that trust with yourself, that relationship that you have with you, so that the decisions that you're making are the decisions that align with you. We're going back to that alignment. We're getting back on track. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm doing 2 free webinars. The first of those webinars is all about leading yourself. We're going to be leaning into this area, this idea of getting to know yourself, getting to reacquaint you with you and trust yourself and be kind to you, to lead you first. So join me for that June 12th. I would love, love, love to have you there. And we're going to go deeper into this topic. And then when you have done these things, then you're ready for that reset. And again, on June 26th, we'll be doing that reset work where we're looking at where you're at, what you've accomplished already this year. I guarantee you've already done more than you're giving yourself credit for. And we're going to turn our attention forward and look at what we want you to achieve over the next 6 months. So that's going to be on the 26th. You don't need to do it with me. I'd love to do if you would do it with me. But if you don't want to come to the webinar, if you are doing that on your own, again, ask yourself those questions. What have you done already this year? What's missing? What do you want to do going forward? We'll go a little bit more in depth in our webinar, but think about what that looks like for you. And then finally, before we wrap up today, there's just a couple more things I wanted to offer you. Number 1, when you're thinking about getting back on track and you're thinking about the goals that you have for yourself, what I would encourage you to think about is that a really good goal, one that is meaningful and will have an impact on your life, is a goal that requires you to become a new person to achieve the goal. And I've heard different iterations of this expression, but it goes something like this. The purpose of a goal isn't necessarily that you achieve the goal itself. The purpose of the goal is the person you become in trying to achieve it. So when you think about the goals that you are setting for the balance of this year or some other goal, look at that goal and think about who you are now and maybe what it is about you currently that is preventing you from reaching that goal. If you were different in some way, maybe you would already have the results that you're seeking. So that's the first thing, is what is the gap there? And who do you need to become? Who would you need to be in order to have that goal? And paint a clear picture of who that person is. If it means setting boundaries, then you might ask yourself, do I like that person? And that's where I'm going next, is once you've decided who you need to be to have that goal, find a way to love that person. Because if you're setting boundaries, and right now you're thinking people who set boundaries are bad because they're selfish, they really should not set boundaries because it's inconvenient for everybody else and it's selfish. You're not going to want to set boundaries for yourself because at a subconscious level, you don't like people with boundaries. And so you don't want to be a person with boundaries. If the person that you need to become to set the goal maybe delivers feedback to people that isn't always rosy, you might have to deliver constructive feedback and you don't like to be the bearer of bad news. If you can't love that person, if you can't find the good in delivering bad news, you may never reach that goal because you'll never want to be the person who's delivering the hard feedback. So these are a couple of examples, and I encourage you to look at your goal, who you need to be or become to achieve that goal. And if there are aspects of that person that repel you, you can ask yourself if you really want that goal then. If you never want to set a boundary, if you never want to deliver criticism, maybe that's not the right goal for you. But if you do really want that goal and you do want to be that person, that's a different question. And then the exercise becomes loving that person and then becoming that person. So that's one thing I encourage you to think about. The other thing is I would love for you to get support in achieving whatever goals you set for yourself. When you decide to get back on track and you look at what that involves, support yourself. There's a reason why we fall off track, and often it's because we don't have enough support in place. We haven't really been able to prioritize it. So give yourself that gift. Give yourself the gift of having support. And if working with someone is a way of doing that, then by all means, I encourage you to make that investment. You know, I'm here for you. I have my group coming up. And if that's something that appeals to you, that might be a beautiful place for you to come and focus on you, focus on getting back on track, focus on your goals, focus on what it's like to be surrounded by a community of women who are thinking the same way that you are. So I just wanted to encourage you to give that more thought. And if you have questions about it, to reach out to me, because again, I'd love to speak with you about it. I would welcome the opportunity to get to know you and to see if this would be a good fit for you. So with that, my dear friend, thank you for joining me this week. Thank you for spending this time together. By being here, by listening through, already you are so much closer to being back on track. You've got a framework now that you can look at to focus on whether you are off track, and if so, how you're going to get yourself back on track. I've got some free opportunities to work together to help you reconnect with yourself as a leader, to help you identify what your goals are for the year. And if you want to go further than that, we can do that too. So thank you again. I'm really excited to see you at the upcoming webinar. I'm excited to have you here this week. I'm excited for what's in store for you over the balance of the year. And thank you. And I look forward to reconnecting with you again very soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.